I got home early from my business trip, hoping to surprise my wife, Emily. We've been married for 7 years, and I always made a point of bringing her something after my trips, whether it was a small trinket or a bag of her favorite coffee beans. But this time, I had planned something much bigger, a surprise anniversary trip to the Bahamas. I had the tickets in my bag and couldn't wait to see her reaction when I told her. It had been a rough few months, and I thought maybe this trip would help us reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. As I pulled into the driveway, something immediately felt off. Emily's car was parked in its usual spot, but there was another vehicle there, a sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize. My first thought was that maybe her friend Rachel had come over. They sometimes had coffee or wine together when I was away. But as I approached the house, I noticed the blinds were drawn, which wasn't like Emily. We always left them open during the day to let the natural light in. I unlocked the front door quietly, intending to sneak in and surprise her. The house was eerily quiet at first. I dropped my bag by the door and made my way toward the kitchen, expecting to hear the familiar hum of the coffee maker or the faint sound of the TV. Instead, I heard something else, soft voices coming from upstairs. One of them was Emily's, and the other, unmistakably, a man's. My heart started to race. I stood at the base of the stairs, straining to hear what they were saying. I couldn't make out the words, but there was a lightness in her voice, a tone I hadn't heard in months. My mind raced through a million possibilities. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe her brother had stopped by unexpectedly. Maybe. But then I heard it. Her laugh. That warm, playful laugh she used to save for me. My stomach twisted, and my hand froze on the stair railing. I forced myself to move, taking slow, deliberate steps up the stairs. Each one felt heavier than the last, as if I was walking towards something I wasn't prepared to face. When I reached the top, I paused outside the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. The sound of their voices was clearer now, and I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I peeked through the crack in the door, and there they were. Emily was lying on the bed, half covered by the sheets, her body turned toward a man I didn't recognize. He was shirtless, propped up on one elbow beside her, his hand resting casually on her bare waist. She was laughing, her head tilted toward him, completely at ease, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I stood there, frozen, as I watched my wife share a moment of intimacy with a stranger, a moment that should have been mine. The plane tickets in my pocket suddenly felt like a cruel joke. This was supposed to be our anniversary surprise, a celebration of our love. But now, all I could feel was the weight of betrayal crushing me from the inside. I should have stormed in right then. I wanted to burst through the door, to scream, to demand how she could do this. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the sheer shock of the moment, or maybe some part of me wasn't ready to confront the truth. Instead, I turned around and made my way back down the stairs as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want them to know I had seen. Not yet. When I reached the kitchen, I collapsed into a chair, my hands shaking as I stared blankly at the tickets in front of me. A trip to the Bahamas. I had planned it so carefully, thinking it would reignite the spark that had been fading between us. I had blamed it on stress, on work, on the grind of daily life. Never, in all those sleepless nights where I'd wondered if something was wrong, did I think she was pulling away because of someone else. The laughter from upstairs drifted down, a haunting reminder of how blind I had been. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our recent text messages. Grocery lists, reminders to pick up dry cleaning, the occasional "I love you" that now felt hollow. How had I missed this? Had this been going on for weeks? Months? Longer? My mind was racing with questions, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a fling. The way they talked, the way they laughed, it was the ease of people who had been together for a while. My wife had been living a double life, and I had been completely oblivious. Every rational part of me screamed to get up and leave, to walk out that door and never look back. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the enormity of what I had just discovered. This house, our home, suddenly felt like a stranger's place, like I didn't belong here anymore. I opened up her social media, scrolling through photos of us smiling at family gatherings, on vacations, at dinners. Every picture of us together felt like a lie now. I thought back to moments where she had seemed distant, distracted, and realized that every time I had asked if something was wrong, she had brushed it off with an easy, "I'm just tired." How long had I been living in this illusion? I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind spiraling into a dark pit of doubt and despair. The man upstairs in my bed with my wife was more than just a passing fling. He was a sign that my marriage had been dead for longer than I realized. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and forced conversations. Emily acted as if everything was normal, but I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my mind. The sight of her in bed with him, her laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. I started watching her more closely, looking for any sign that would confirm my suspicions. She was careful. I'll give her that. No obvious slip-ups. But I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't unsee it. I began snooping. It started small, just glancing at her phone when she left it unattended, scrolling through her texts. Nothing suspicious there. I checked her email, her social media, her work calendar. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. She was good at covering her tracks. But then I found it. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, I noticed her laptop sitting open on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but something inside me told me to look. I clicked on her browsing history and found an unfamiliar email address, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't her work email, and it wasn't the one I had access to. My heart pounded as I clicked on it, but it was password protected. Of course it was. I tried a few obvious combinations, our anniversary date, her mother's maiden name, but nothing worked. I was about to give up when I noticed a small notebook tucked under a pile of mail on the counter. It was one of those planner journals she always carried around with her, filled with to-do lists and reminders. I flipped through it, not really expecting to find anything, when a small note caught my eye. It was written in her handwriting, in the corner of a random page. Black Swan 12. It was worth a shot. I typed the password into the login screen, and my breath caught when the inbox opened. There it was. Dozens of emails, all from the same address. todd.gregory@hotmail.com. The subject lines were innocuous enough. Lunch on Thursday? Can't wait to see you. But I didn't need to open them to know what they meant. The man in my bed had a name. Todd. I clicked on one of the emails, and my stomach churned as I read the contents. It was a message from Emily, sent just a few days before I got back from my trip. She had written about how much she missed him, how she couldn't wait to be in his arms again. There were details, intimate details, that made me feel physically ill. I scrolled through more messages, each one confirming what I already knew but didn't want to face. This had been going on for months, maybe longer, and I had been completely blind to it. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. I felt like I was going to be sick. Everything in my life, everything I thought I knew, had been a lie. Emily had been lying to me for so long, and I had just let it happen. But now I had proof. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the closed laptop, my mind reeling from the betrayal. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on me. The weight of what I had uncovered pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Emily had been cheating on me for months, maybe even longer. The woman I had built my life with, the person I trusted most, had been lying to my face. But what now? I had the proof, I had the knowledge, but I didn't know what to do with it. The logical part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to make her explain how she could do this to me, to us. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, that wanted to believe this was all some horrible mistake, hesitated. I had to think. I needed more time to figure out how to approach this. If I went in guns blazing, it would be a fight. She'd deny, deflect, turn it back on me somehow. I'd seen enough stories like this on Reddit, friends who had gone through it. The cheater always managed to twist things around, make the innocent party feel like they were at fault. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to be calm, collected, and I needed to have a plan. That night, I barely slept. Emily came to bed as usual, curling up next to me, her body warm against mine. I lay stiffly, staring at the ceiling, feeling her breath against my skin. How many nights had she come home to me after being with him? How many times had she lied to my face? The thoughts kept spinning in my head, turning my stomach, but I didn't move. I didn't confront her. Not yet. The next morning, as she got ready for work, I watched her more closely than ever before. Every small movement, every glance at her phone, every smile she gave me felt like an act. I wondered if she knew I was watching her, if she could feel the shift in my behavior. But she played her part perfectly, kissing me on the cheek before she left, telling me she'd be home late because of a meeting. I nodded, feeling a cold rage simmer beneath the surface. As soon as she was gone, I went into full investigator mode. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me or twist the truth. I needed every piece of evidence I could get. I started by cloning her phone, downloading an app that mirrored all of her texts, calls, and messages to my device. It wasn't hard. Her password was the same as always, something I'd known for years. Once I had access to her phone, I set up tiny cameras around the house. One in the living room, one in the bedroom, one in the kitchen. If she was bringing him here, if she was using my home for her affair, I wanted to catch every minute of it. I hated doing this. I felt like a stalker, like a stranger in my own life. But I didn't see another way. Confronting her without hard evidence would just give her room to manipulate the situation, to make me doubt myself. I couldn't let that happen. The next few days were torture. I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine, while inside, I was falling apart. Every text she sent him, every time she lied to me about where she was going, it chipped away at the last remnants of the trust one had in her. I watched the camera footage obsessively, hoping to catch them together, but nothing happened. She was careful, too careful. And then, finally, I caught a break. One night, while I was at work late, I got an alert on my phone. One of the cameras had detected motion in the bedroom. I opened the app, my heart racing, and watched as Emily led Todd into our room. He was laughing, his arms slung casually around her shoulders, as if he belonged there, as if I didn't exist. I clenched my fists as I watched them undress, their bodies falling into each other with an ease that made me sick. They didn't care. They didn't care that this was my home, my life. They were making a mockery of everything I had built, everything I had believed in. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone against the wall, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed this. I needed this proof. I recorded the whole thing, every minute of their betrayal, until they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms. When I got home that night, Emily was already in bed, the same bed she had just shared with him. She looked up at me, her eyes soft and sleepy, and smiled. "Hey, how was work?" she asked, her voice light, as if nothing had happened. I stared at her, my chest tight with rage. "It was fine," I lied, my voice strained. I climbed into bed beside her, my body stiff with anger and disgust. How could she lie there, next to me, after what she had just done? How could she look at me and pretend that everything was fine? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay there, listening to her breathing, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a lead blanket. My mind raced with thoughts of what I would do next. Should I confront her now? Should I wait? Should I go straight to a lawyer and start the divorce process? The next morning, as Emily got ready for work, she was her usual self, cheerful, affectionate, acting like the perfect wife. But all I could see was the woman who had betrayed me, the woman who had lied to my face for months, the woman who had destroyed our marriage. "I'll be home late again," she said casually, sipping her coffee. "Another meeting." I nodded, fighting back the urge to call her out right then and there. I wanted to see if she would bring him back again. I needed to know just how deep her lies went. That evening, I stayed late at the office, just like I had the night before. I kept my phone close, waiting for the alert. Sure enough, just after 8 p.m., the notification popped up, motion detected in the bedroom. I opened the app and watched as Emily and Todd made their way upstairs again, laughing, touching, oblivious to the destruction they were leaving in their wake. They didn't care. They didn't care about me, about the life I thought we had. They only cared about each other. This time, I saved the footage. I made copies, backing it up on multiple drives, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I had all the proof I needed now. There was no way she could lie her way out of this. The next morning, I didn't wait for her to leave for work. I sat at the kitchen table, the footage pulled up on my laptop, waiting for her to come downstairs. When she finally appeared, dressed in her usual work attire, she smiled at me, the same fake smile she'd been giving me for months. "Good morning," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I didn't respond. I just watched her, my heart pounding in my chest. She must have sensed something was off, because she glanced at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice cautious. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I turned the laptop around, so she could see the screen. "What is this, Emily?" I asked, my voice low and controlled. She froze, her eyes widening as she looked at the screen. For a moment, she didn't say anything. I watched as the color drained from her face, her hand trembling slightly as she set her coffee mug down. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said, my voice sharp. "What matters is that I know. I know everything." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find the right words. But there were no right words. There was nothing she could say that would make this okay. She started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Don't even try to explain. I've watched it. I've seen it all." Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice shaking. I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. "It's exactly what I think, Emily," I shouted, my voice breaking. "You've been cheating on me. In our house. In our bed. With him." Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cold. "A mistake? A mistake is one time, Emily. This has been going on for months. Months. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she cried. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "But you did," I said, my voice cold. "You destroyed everything. Our marriage. Our life. You threw it all away for him." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound in the room was Emily's quiet sobs, her guilt hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. I had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was here, all I felt was an overwhelming emptiness. I pushed the laptop toward her, the footage still playing on the screen. "You can keep your apologies," I said, my voice flat. "I'm done." And with that, I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her tears and the evidence of her betrayal. Vi skazali. Continue. Programa ChatGPT skazala. I walked out of the kitchen, my head pounding with the weight of everything that had just happened. My body felt heavy, as if every step was draining the life out of me. I could hear Emily crying behind me, her sobs muffled by the distance I was putting between us. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I wasn't even sure if I was angry anymore. There was just this dull, aching numbness that had taken over, like a part of me had shut down. In the living room, I sat down on the edge of the couch, my hands clasped together tightly. The plane tickets were still on the coffee table, staring back at me, mocking me. I reached for them, crumpling them in my fist, but it didn't make me feel any better. It was like everything I had worked for, everything I thought I knew about my life, was just slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. For 7 years, I thought we had something real. Sure, things had gotten rough over the past few months, but I chalked it up to the usual stresses: work, routine, the monotony of daily life. I never thought it would come to this. I never imagined that while I was planning a future for us, she was planning a future with someone else. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to walk back into that kitchen and demand more answers. How long had this been going on? What had I done wrong? Was she ever going to tell me? Or had she planned to keep this secret until the end? But another part of me, the part that was already exhausted from the confrontation, knew it didn't matter. The answers wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the wall, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Eventually, I heard Emily moving upstairs. I didn't follow her. Let her do what she needed to do. I had already decided that I was done, But saying it out loud, walking away, was something else entirely. I wasn't sure I had the strength to handle it yet. After a while, I stood up, pacing the room. The anger that had been bubbling under the surface started to rise again, clawing at my chest. I needed space. I needed air. Grabbing my keys, I walked out the front door without saying another word to Emily. The house felt like a prison, and I couldn't breathe inside it anymore. I got in the car and drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind kept replaying the past few days, everything I had uncovered, every lie Emily had told me. It didn't seem real. I kept expecting to wake up from this nightmare, to find out it was all some horrible mistake. But the pain in my chest was too real, too raw. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a nearby park. It was late, and the place was deserted, the only sound coming from the wind rustling through the trees. I got out of the car and walked toward one of the benches, collapsing onto it. I leaned forward, burying my face in my hands, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't know how long I sat there, but at some point, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting it to be Emily, but it wasn't. It was my friend, Mike. He had been calling for the past couple of days, and I hadn't gotten back to him. I stared at his name on the screen, debating whether to answer. I wasn't ready to talk about what had happened, but at the same time, I couldn't sit in silence any longer. I swiped to answer the call, bringing the phone to my ear. "Hey," I said, my voice rough, like I hadn't spoken in hours. "Jason? You good, man? I've been trying to get a hold of you," Mike said, his voice full of concern. I didn't know how to respond. How do you explain something like this? How do you tell your friend that your entire life has just been torn apart? "Yeah, I trailed off, my throat tightening. I couldn't bring myself to say I was fine. I wasn't. Something's wrong, isn't it?" Mike pressed, picking up on the tension in my voice. "What's going on?" I swallowed hard, my hands trembling slightly as I held the phone. "Emily's been cheating on me," I finally said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Saying it out loud made it feel even more real, and I hated it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What?" Mike's voice was sharp with shock. "Dude, are you serious?" "Yeah. I found out a few days ago," I said, my voice cracking. "It's been going on for months. She's been lying to me this whole time." "Holy shit, Jason. I don't even know what to say, man. That's messed up." Mike's voice softened, his usual joking tone replaced with genuine concern. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. "I don't even know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I feel like my whole life is falling apart, and I can't stop it." "Listen, man, you don't have to figure everything out right now," Mike said, his voice steady and reassuring. "You just found out. You're in shock. It's okay to not know what to do, but you're not alone in this. Whatever you need, I'm here for you." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until he said it. The weight on my chest lifted just a little, enough for me to take a deep breath. "Thanks, Mike. I don't even know where to start with this. I haven't told anyone yet." "You don't have to rush into anything," Mike said, "but you can't keep it all bottled up, either. This is huge, Jason. You need to talk about it. If not to me, then to someone. You can't go through this alone." "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was another pause, and then Mike spoke again, his tone more serious. "What are you going to do about Emily?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I told her I'm done, but I haven't. I haven't done anything yet. I don't know if I can just walk away. I don't know if I want to." "I get it. It's not an easy decision," Mike said, "but you deserve better than this, Jason. She's been lying to you, cheating on you. You can't just let that slide." "I know," I repeated, though the words felt hollow. I did know, but knowing and acting on it were two very different things. "Look, why don't you come stay with me for a bit?" Mike offered. "You don't have to deal with this alone, and you shouldn't be stuck in that house right now. Come crash at my place for a few days, clear your head." The thought of going back to that house, back to the bed where Emily had betrayed me, made my skin crawl. I couldn't stay there. Not tonight. Yeah, maybe I'll do that," I said, feeling a small sense of relief at the idea of getting away from it all, even if just for a little while. Good. Pack some stuff, and I'll see you in an hour, Mike said, his voice more upbeat now that we had a plan. Okay, I agreed, feeling like it was the first real step I had taken since all of this started. We hung up, and I sat there for a few more minutes, letting the conversation settle in. It wasn't much, but it felt like the first step forward. I wasn't ready to face everything yet, but at least I didn't have to do it alone. By the time I got back to the house, it was dark. I parked in the driveway and just sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. The lights were off inside, and I wondered if Emily was still crying, or if she had given up and gone to bed. Part of me didn't care. Another part still felt that familiar pull of guilt, that instinct to go in and comfort her, even though I knew she didn't deserve it. But I couldn't go in. Not tonight. I grabbed a duffel bag from the back seat and headed inside, moving quickly and quietly through the house. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want another conversation. I went straight to the bedroom, keeping my eyes down, ignoring the bed that had been tainted by her affair. I threw a few clothes into the bag, grabbed my phone charger, and a few essentials from the bathroom. As I was zipping up the bag, I heard movement in the hallway. My heart sank, knowing that Emily was up, knowing that she'd probably heard me come in. I debated whether to just leave before she could say anything, but I wasn't fast enough. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts, the one she always slept in when she wanted to feel close to me. It used to make me smile, seeing her in it, but now it just felt like another lie. Jason. Her voice was hoarse, broken, like she had been crying for hours. Please, please don't go. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at the person who had betrayed me, who had destroyed everything we had built. I threw the bag over my shoulder and moved toward the door, but she stepped in front of me, blocking my way. Please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face again. I know I messed up. I know I ruined everything, but we can fix this. We can make this work. Please don't leave me. I stared at her, my heart aching, torn between the love I had for her and the overwhelming pain of her betrayal. You didn't just mess up, Emily. You destroyed us. You lied to me. You cheated on me. How do you expect us to come back from that? I didn't mean for it to happen, she sobbed, her hands shaking as she reached for me. It got out of control. I didn't know how to stop. But I love you, Jason. I never stopped loving you. I shook my head, stepping back from her touch. You don't get to say that, I said, my voice hard. You don't get to say you love me after everything you've done. She crumbled in front of me, sinking to her knees as she wept. I'm sorry, she whispered over and over again. I'm so sorry. I watched her for a moment, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. This was the woman I had loved for 7 years, the woman I had built my life with, and now she was nothing more than a stranger to me. I didn't recognize the person in front of me, and I didn't know if I ever would again. I can't stay here, Emily, I said, my voice soft but firm. I need time. I need space. And you need to figure out what you really want. With that, I stepped around her, my heart heavy, and walked out of the house without looking back. I drove to Mike's place in a daze, my mind replaying the scene in the kitchen over and over again. Emily, broken and crying, begging me to stay. Her words echoed in my head. I love you. As if that somehow excused everything that had happened. As if it could erase the months of lies, the betrayal, the affair. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. By the time I pulled up to Mike's house, it was late. His place was on the quieter side of town, far enough away that I could already feel a sense of distance from everything I'd left behind. The porch light was on, and Mike was waiting by the door when I pulled into the driveway, a beer in his hand and a concerned look on his face. Hey, man, he said softly as I got out of the car, his eyes scanning my face. You look like hell. I forced a small, bitter smile. I feel like it. Mike stepped forward and pulled me into a brief hug, clapping me on the back. Come on in. I've got a cold one waiting for you. I followed him inside, the familiar comfort of his place washing over me. Mike's house had always felt like a safe haven, somewhere I could go when I needed to escape, even if it was just for a few hours. We'd been friends for years, since college, and he'd always been the guy I could count on when things got tough. Tonight was no different. I dropped my bag by the door and took the beer he handed me, taking a long sip before collapsing onto the couch. The exhaustion hit me all at once. The sleepless nights, the emotional toll of everything that had happened, the weight of my decision to leave. I felt like I could barely keep my eyes open. Mike sat down across from me, watching me carefully. "So, what happened?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I confronted her, showed her the footage. She didn't deny it, just broke down, crying, saying it was a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake, Mike. It was a choice. She chose to lie to me, to cheat on me, and I can't. I can't get past that. Mike nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, man, that's heavy. I don't blame you for needing space. Shit, if I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could even be that calm about it." "I don't feel calm," I admitted, staring down at the beer in my hands. "I feel like I'm barely holding it together. One minute I'm pissed, and the next I just feel numb. Like everything I thought I knew about my life is gone." "It's a lot to process," Mike said gently. "You've been hit with something huge, and it's okay to feel like shit. It's okay to not have all the answers right now." I took another sip of beer, the bitterness settling in my chest. "She begged me to stay," I said quietly. "Said she still loved me, that she didn't mean for it to happen. But I don't know if I can ever believe her again." Mike shook his head. "Man, if she really loved you, she wouldn't have done this in the first place. She made a choice, and now she's got to live with the consequences. You deserve better than that." I swallowed hard, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in my gut. I did deserve better, but that didn't make the hurt go away. It didn't make it any easier to walk away from someone I had spent the last 7 years of my life with. "What do I even do now?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Do I just end it? Is that what I'm supposed to do?" Mike sighed, leaning back in his chair. "That's up to you, man. Nobody can make that decision for you. But you've got to think about what you really want. Can you see yourself staying with her after everything that's happened? Can you ever trust her again? Because if you can't, there's no point in dragging it out. You'll just hurt yourself even more." I knew he was right. Deep down, I knew I couldn't stay. The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces, and no amount of apologies or promises could put it back together. But the thought of divorce, of ending everything we had built together, felt like an anchor dragging me down. "I don't know if I can handle a divorce," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It feels so final. Like if I do that, I'm admitting that everything we had was a lie." Mike leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Jason, it wasn't all a lie. You guys had good times. You built a life together. But people change, and sometimes things fall apart. That doesn't mean your entire relationship was worthless. But you can't hold on to something that's already broken. It's not your job to fix it, especially not if she's the one who broke it in the first place." His words hit me hard, a wave of emotion swelling up in my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the tears came anyway, burning at the corners of my eyes. I wiped them away quickly, embarrassed, but Mike didn't say anything. He just sat there, giving me space to fall apart. "I thought she was my forever," I choked out, the words breaking as they left my throat. "I thought we'd grow old together, have kids, live the life we always talked about. And now it's just gone." "I know, man. I know," Mike said quietly. "It sucks. There's no other way to say it. It fucking sucks. But you're going to get through this. It's going to hurt for a long time, but eventually you'll come out the other side, and you'll be stronger for it." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. Right now, it felt like the pain would never end, like I'd never be able to move on from this. But I had to try. I couldn't stay stuck in this limbo forever. We sat in silence for a while after that, just drinking our beers, the quiet comfort of friendship easing the worst of the storm in my chest. Eventually, Mike stood up and clapped me on the shoulder. "Come on, let's get you settled in the guest room. You need some sleep." I followed him down the hall, my body feeling like it was running on fumes. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a neatly made bed and a few framed photos on the walls. It was a far cry from the chaos of my mind, but I was grateful for the peace it offered. "Thanks, Mike," I said as I set my bag down on the floor. "I don't know what I'd do without you, man." "You'd be fine," Mike said with a grin, "but I'm glad you're here. Get some rest. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." I nodded, and after he left, I collapsed onto the bed, my body sinking into the mattress. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of relief. I didn't have all the answers yet, but at least I wasn't alone in this. At least I had somewhere to go. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of the day slowly started to lift. I wasn't ready to face the future yet, but for the first time since I found out about the affair, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow over the room. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was, the events of the past few days slipping away in the haze of sleep. But then reality came crashing back, and with it, the familiar ache in my chest. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to gather the strength to get up. I could hear Mike moving around in the kitchen, the sound of coffee brewing and dishes clattering. The normalcy of it all felt jarring, like the world was continuing on as if nothing had changed, while my life had been turned upside down. Eventually, I forced myself out of bed and got dressed. I padded down the hallway, the smell of coffee pulling me into the kitchen, where Mike was sitting at the table with a newspaper spread out in front of him. He looked up as I walked in, giving me a small smile. "Morning," he said, pushing a mug of coffee toward me. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in days," I admitted, taking a sip of the coffee. It was strong, just the way I liked it. "Good," Mike said, folding up the newspaper and setting it aside. "So, what's the plan today?" I shrugged, feeling the familiar weight of uncertainty settle back over me. "I don't know. I guess I need to figure out what to do about Emily. I can't just leave everything hanging like this." Mike nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Have you thought about talking to a lawyer, just to figure out your options?" The idea of a lawyer made my stomach turn. I guess I should, but it feels like such a big step. Like once I do that, there's no going back. "Maybe," Mike said, "but it doesn't mean you have to go through with anything right away. It just means you're getting the information you need to make an informed decision. You don't want to be blindsided later if things get messy." He was right, of course. I had no idea what the next few weeks would bring, but I needed to be prepared. I couldn't just ignore the situation and hope it would resolve itself. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'll give someone a call." After breakfast, I spent the rest of the morning researching divorce attorneys in the area. It felt surreal, typing those words into a search engine, divorce lawyer, as if I was writing the ending to my own story. I found a few highly recommended firms and made an appointment for later in the week. Just the thought of sitting down with a lawyer made my stomach churn, but I knew I had to do it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Mike tried to distract me with a movie, some video games, even a trip to the gym, but my mind kept drifting back to Emily. I wondered what she was doing, if she had told Todd about our confrontation, if she was still crying or if she had moved on, just like that. The thought of her with him, still in our house, still in our bed, made my blood boil, but I tried to push it down. There was no point in torturing myself with those thoughts. That night, as I lay in the guest room, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about the future. Everything felt so uncertain, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, not sure whether I was going to fall or fly. I didn't know what my life would look like a month from now, or even a week from now. All I knew was that things would never be the same. The meeting with the lawyer was even more overwhelming than I had expected. Sitting in that sleek office, with the expensive leather chairs and the framed degrees on the wall, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The lawyer, her name was Linda, was calm, professional, and efficient. She walked me through the process, explaining what my options were, what the timeline might look like, and what I could expect if I decided to file for divorce. I sat there, nodding along, feeling like I was watching it all happen to someone else. It felt so final, so cold. But I knew this was the reality I had to face. "If you decide to go through with this," Linda said, her tone gentle but firm, "we'll start by filing the paperwork. It can be a straightforward process, or it can get complicated, depending on how your wife responds. Are you expecting her to contest the divorce? I hesitated, thinking about Emily's tearful pleas, her promises that we could work things out. I don't know, I admitted. She said she didn't want me to leave. She wants to fix things. But I don't think I can. Linda nodded, as if she had heard this 100 times before. It's common for one spouse to want reconciliation, even after infidelity. But you need to ask yourself if that's something you're willing to do. Is it possible for you to rebuild the trust, to move forward? Or is the relationship beyond repair? I stared down at my hands, the weight of her question pressing down on me. Could I move forward? Could I ever trust Emily again? Could I ever look at her without seeing the betrayal, without thinking of Todd? I don't know, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Linda leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but direct. It's a difficult decision, and it's not one you have to make today. But if you choose to go through with the divorce, I'll be here to guide you through it. I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Thank you. As I left the office, my mind was spinning. The reality of what I was facing felt like too much to handle all at once. Divorce, splitting up our assets, possibly selling the house. And then there was the emotional side of it. Telling our friends, our families, the people who had always thought of us as the perfect couple. The thought of explaining everything made me sick. When I got back to Mike's, I collapsed onto the couch, feeling drained. He glanced over at me, raising an eyebrow. How'd it go? I shrugged, running a hand through my hair. It was a lot. I didn't realize how much goes into this. It feels like I'm about to dismantle my entire life, piece by piece. Mike handed me a beer, his expression sympathetic. Yeah, man, it's a big step, but at least you're taking control of the situation. You're not just sitting around, letting her call the shots. I nodded, though it didn't make me feel any better. Taking control didn't mean it hurt any less. Over the next few days, I tried to keep myself busy, focusing on work and staying out of the house. Mike's place became my refuge, and I was grateful for his company, even when we didn't talk much. Just having someone around made it easier to bear the weight of everything I was going through. But the more time I spent away from Emily, the more I realized how broken our relationship truly was. Even before the affair, things hadn't been perfect. We had drifted apart, and I had ignored the warning signs, convinced that we would eventually find our way back to each other. But now, it was clear that the distance between us had only grown wider, and I didn't know if there was any way to bridge that gap. One afternoon, as I sat at Mike's kitchen table, staring blankly at my laptop, I got a text from Emily. We need to talk. Please. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I left, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face her again. But I couldn't avoid her forever. After a long pause, I typed a response. Okay, I'll come by the house later. The hours leading up to that meeting were some of the longest of my life. I paced around Mike's place, trying to prepare myself for whatever Emily had to say. Part of me was dreading it, while another part of me was desperate for some kind of closure. When I finally pulled into the driveway of our house, my house, it felt foreign, like I didn't belong there anymore. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily was waiting for me in the living room when I walked in. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying, her hair disheveled. She was still wearing the sweatshirt she had been wearing the night I left, and it hung loosely on her frame, as if she hadn't bothered to change in days. Jason, she whispered, her voice cracking as she stood up. I'm so sorry. I stayed where I was, keeping a safe distance between us. What do you want to talk about, Emily? She took a deep breath, wringing her hands together nervously. I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything, and I'll never be able to take it back. But I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you. Please, Jason, I'm begging you. Don't do this. I looked at her, my heart aching, but I couldn't let her words sway me. Emily, you've already lost me. You lost me the minute you decided to cheat. Her face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through it. Please, just give me another chance. I shook my head, my voice cold. I can't. Emily, I can't trust you anymore. Every time I look at you, all I see is what you did. You didn't just make a mistake, you made a choice. And now, we have to live with that. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I love you, Jason. I never stopped loving you. I closed my eyes, fighting the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. I stood there, staring at her, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. This was it, the end of everything we had built together. I'm filing for divorce, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. No, please don't. We can work through this. Please, Jason, don't leave me. But I had already made my decision. There was no going back. I'm sorry, I said, my voice soft but firm. It's over. And with that, I turned and walked out of the house for the last time. As I walked out of the house, it hit me. This was the end of everything I had known for the past 7 years. The love, the memories, the plans we had made together. It was all shattered now, scattered like the broken pieces of our marriage. The air outside felt heavy, pressing against my chest, but at the same time, there was a strange lightness to it. Like I had finally released something I'd been carrying for far too long. I got into my car, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't drive right away. I just sat there for a moment, staring at the front door of the house. My house. Our house. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. Not after everything that had happened inside those walls. Not after Emily had turned it into the place where she betrayed me. For a fleeting moment, I felt the urge to go back inside, to take one last look at the life I was leaving behind. But I knew there was nothing left to see. That chapter of my life was closed now, and all that was left to do was move on. Somehow, with a deep breath, I started the car and pulled out of the driveway. As I drove away, I didn't look back. There was no point in looking back anymore. My future, whatever it would be, was ahead of me now. The next few weeks were a blur. I officially filed for divorce, as I had promised Emily I would, and the process was as emotionally draining as I had feared. There were meetings with lawyers, endless paperwork, and discussions about how to divide our assets. We didn't have kids, thank God, but the house. The house was a point of contention. Emily wanted to keep it, saying that it was her safe space, the place she couldn't bear to leave. But I knew I couldn't stay there either, not with all the memories of her infidelity tainting it. In the end, I agreed to sell the house. It was easier that way. It felt like a clean break, a way to wipe the slate clean and start over. The thought of someone else living there, living in the space we had built together, hurt, but at least it wouldn't be either of us. We both needed to let it go. Emily's attempts to salvage the marriage had continued for a while. She texted me every day at first, apologizing, begging for another chance. She swore that she would change, that we could rebuild what had been broken. But each time, I read her messages with a sense of detachment. The emotional ties that had once bound me to her were unraveling, slowly but surely, with each passing day. I didn't respond to most of her messages. I couldn't. What was there left to say? I knew that engaging with her would only prolong the inevitable, and I had already made my choice. There was no going back. Eventually, the messages became less frequent. The calls stopped. Emily's silence, once something that would have worried me, felt like a relief. I had needed distance, and now I finally had it. But it wasn't just distance from her. It was distance from the man I had been in that marriage. The man who had ignored the signs, who had trusted too much, who had believed that love was enough to fix everything. It wasn't. One afternoon, as I was packing up the last of my things from the house before the sale was finalized, I found an old photo album tucked away in the back of the closet. I hesitated before opening it, knowing that it would be filled with images of happier times, vacations, family gatherings, random snapshots of us in love. But for some reason, I couldn't resist. I sat down on the floor, flipping through the pages. There we were, smiling at the camera during our honeymoon, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched the sunset from the beach. There we were at Christmas, laughing as we unwrapped gifts in our pajamas, her eyes shining with joy. And there we were at a friend's wedding, dancing under twinkling lights, her arms wrapped around me as if she never wanted to let go. The memories hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over me with a force I hadn't expected. For so long, I had been focused on the betrayal, on the pain of her affair, that I had almost forgotten about the good times. And there had been good times, so many of them, but they weren't enough. They couldn't outweigh the damage that had been done. And as much as those photos reminded me of the love we had once shared, they also reminded me that it was gone now. No matter how hard I had tried to hold on to it, it had slipped through my fingers, just like the sand on that beach where we watched the sunset. I closed the album and stood up, placing it in one of the boxes to be packed away. I wasn't ready to throw it out just yet. Maybe one day I would be able to look back at those memories with a sense of peace instead of pain. But not today. The day the house sold was both a relief and a heartache. I stood in the empty living room, looking around at the bare walls, the echoes of our life together still lingering in the silence. This place had been the backdrop to so many moments, some of the happiest and now, some of the most painful. As the real estate agent handed me the final papers to sign, I hesitated for just a second. It felt like closing the door on the last piece of my old life. But I signed them anyway. I had to. When it was done, I handed the keys over, and just like that, the house was no longer mine. I walked out the front door for the last time, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and freedom. It was over. Truly over. The months that followed were a slow process of healing. I rented a small apartment, far enough away from the neighborhood I had shared with Emily that I could start to build a new routine. Mike stayed close, checking in on me often, and I leaned on him more than I had ever expected to. I wasn't used to asking for help. I had always been the one who tried to hold it together for everyone else. But now, I needed support, and Mike was there to offer it without hesitation. Some days were harder than others. There were times when I would be doing something as simple as grocery shopping or driving to work, and a wave of grief would hit me out of nowhere. I'd see something that reminded me of Emily, a song on the radio, a restaurant we used to go to, and it would all come flooding back. The pain of losing her, the betrayal, the love we once had and could never get back. But with each passing week, the pain lessened. It didn't disappear entirely, but it became more manageable, more distant. I found myself thinking about the future more often than the past. I started going out again, meeting up with old friends I hadn't seen in a while. I even considered dating, though the thought of letting someone new into my life felt overwhelming at times. And then, one day, I woke up and realized that I didn't think about Emily as much anymore. The ache in my chest that had been constant for so long was starting to fade. It wasn't gone completely, but it no longer consumed me. I could breathe a little easier. One night, a few months after the divorce was finalized, Mike and I were at a bar, catching up over drinks. We had both had long weeks at work, and the beer was a welcome escape. "So," Mike said, raising his glass with a grin, "any hot dates on the horizon? You're a free man now. Time to get back out there." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I don't know, man. I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet." Mike raised an eyebrow. "It's been months, Jason. You've had time to heal. Besides, not every woman is going to be like Emily. There are good ones out there." "I know," I said, taking a sip of my drink, "but it's not that simple. I thought I had it all figured out before, and look how that turned out." "Fair point," Mike said with a nod. "But you can't let that hold you back forever. You deserve to be happy." His words stuck with me. For so long, I had been focused on surviving the divorce, on moving past the pain, that I hadn't even thought about what happiness looked like for me anymore. What did I want? What did my future look like now that the life I had planned was gone? As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I realized that I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could figure it out. I didn't need to have all the answers right now. I just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Months turned into a year, and slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt my life. The scars from Emily's betrayal were still there, but they had faded with time, becoming a part of my past rather than something that defined me. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but eventually, I met someone who reminded me that love didn't have to be painful. Her name was Rachel, and she was kind, funny, and completely different from Emily in all the best ways. We took things slow, both of us having been through our own share of heartbreak, but there was a peace in our relationship that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about trying to fill the void that Emily had left. It was about building something new, something real. I still thought about Emily from time to time, especially when I drove by places we used to go or when something reminded me of our life together. But it didn't hurt the way it used to. I had come to terms with the fact that some things were meant to end, even if you didn't want them to. People changed. Relationships ended. And that was okay. Life went on. Looking back now, I realized that the person I was when I first found out about Emily's affair feels like a different version of me. That man was shattered, broken by the betrayal of someone he loved. But I'm not that man anymore. I'm stronger now, more aware of who I am and what I deserve. The pain of the past will always be a part of my story, but it doesn't define me. It never did. And as I move forward, I know that whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. Because I survived. And I'm still standing. As the days passed, my life gradually began to resemble something whole again. There were still scars, still moments of reflection where I'd catch myself thinking about the what-ifs, the different life I once thought I'd have. But those thoughts were fleeting now. They didn't control me the way they once did. I had spent so long living in the shadow of that betrayal, and now, finally, I was stepping into the light. Rachel became more than just someone to fill the void. She was her own person, someone who had gone through her own struggles and heartbreak. We bonded over shared experiences, both of us knowing what it felt like to have someone you trusted let you down. That mutual understanding made us cautious, but it also made us stronger. We weren't rushing into anything. We took our time, learning about each other, building a relationship on trust, honesty, and openness, the very things I had been missing for so long. One evening, about a year and a half after my divorce from Emily was finalized, Rachel and I were sitting on the balcony of her apartment, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, a warm breeze rustling through the trees below. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of moment I had come to appreciate more than anything now. She turned to me, her eyes soft as she rested her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked quietly. I knew what she meant. She didn't have to say it. Sometimes, I admitted, my gaze fixed on the horizon, but not in the same way I used to. It's more like remembering something from a past life, like it happened to someone else. Rachel nodded, understanding. She had been there for me during the tail end of the divorce process, when I was still grappling with the idea of who I had become after it all. She had seen the worst of my struggles, and she had stuck by me anyway. "Do you ever talk to her?" she asked, her voice tentative, as if she was afraid of the answer. I shook my head. "No, we haven't spoken in over a year." After the divorce was finalized, she tried reaching out a couple of times, but I couldn't. I couldn't go back to that. It wouldn't have helped either of us. Rachel didn't say anything for a while, letting the silence settle between us. I could feel the weight of the question lingering in the air, but it didn't bother me the way it might have before. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I had faced it, accepted it, and moved on. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. I took a deep breath, thinking carefully before I answered. "No," I said softly. "I don't regret ending things. It needed to happen. Staying would have just dragged it out, made things worse for both of us." Rachel nodded again, and I could see the understanding in her eyes. She knew what it meant to walk away from something, even when a part of you wanted to stay, wanted to fix it. But some things weren't meant to be fixed. "Do you?" I asked gently. "Do you regret the choices you made?" Rachel looked away for a moment, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on my arm. "I regret some of the things I let happen, but I don't regret leaving. It was the only way I could be free. You know that feeling." I did. I knew exactly what she meant. There was a certain kind of freedom that came with letting go, even when it felt like it was tearing you apart at the time. But once you got through the pain, once you came out on the other side, you realized that you were stronger than you ever thought you could be. Months passed, and Rachel and I continued to grow closer. We had our ups and downs, of course. No relationship was perfect. But the difference was that we communicated, we listened to each other, and we never let the small things fester into something bigger. It was a stark contrast to my marriage with Emily, where I had ignored so many warning signs, hoping that everything would just work itself out. I had learned from my mistakes. One weekend, Rachel and I decided to take a trip up to the mountains. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, the kind that felt spontaneous and freeing. We packed up the car with snacks, blankets, and a couple of bottles of wine, and headed out of the city, the winding roads leading us into the heart of nature. The fresh mountain air was a welcome escape from the usual routine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. We rented a small cabin near a lake, tucked away in the woods, with a view that stretched out over the water. It was secluded, quiet, the perfect place to just be. No distractions, no reminders of the past, just us, enjoying each other's company. One night, after a long day of hiking and exploring, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets as the fire crackled in the pit beside us. The stars were out in full force, twinkling above us in a way that made everything else feel so small, so insignificant. I could feel Rachel leaning against me, her warmth comforting in the cool night air. "Do you think we'll ever stop being afraid?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at her, my brow furrowing slightly. "Afraid of what?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "Afraid of getting hurt again. Afraid of repeating the past." I sighed softly, understanding the weight behind her words. We had both been carrying that fear, that lingering doubt that maybe we were doomed to repeat the mistakes we had made in our previous relationships. It was hard to shake, even when things were going well. "I think the fear will always be there in some way," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "But I don't think that's a bad thing. It reminds us to be careful, to not take each other for granted. But I also think we've learned. We're not the same people we were before. We know what to watch out for. We know how to communicate." Rachel nodded, her fingers intertwining with mine. "I'm just scared of losing this," she admitted. "Of losing you." "You won't," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. "Promise." "Promise," I said softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. We sat there for a while, just holding each other, the fire casting a warm glow over the porch. I could feel the weight of our past slowly lifting, replaced by the hope of something new, something better. The fear was still there, lingering in the background, but it wasn't as strong as it had once been. We were building something real, something based on trust and understanding. And that was enough for now. As the seasons changed, so did my life. Rachel and I grew closer, moving in together after a year of dating. It felt like the natural next step, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the future. We talked about our dreams, our plans, and while we didn't have everything figured out, that was okay. We were taking it one day at a time. The scars from my past were still there, of course. There were moments when I would catch myself doubting, when the fear of being hurt again would creep up on me. But I was learning to trust again, to believe that not every relationship was destined to end in betrayal. Rachel had shown me that love could be something simple, something beautiful, without the complications and the pain I had come to associate with it. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Rachel resting her head on my lap while we watched a movie, I realized just how far I had come. The man I had been when Emily's betrayal shattered my world felt like a distant memory now. I wasn't that broken, angry person anymore. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, and I had found happiness again. "Do you ever think about the future?" Rachel asked suddenly, her voice breaking through my thoughts. I smiled down at her, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Yeah, I do." "And what do you see?" I paused, thinking about her question. What did I see? For so long, my future had been this blurry, uncertain thing, filled with fear and doubt. But now, when I thought about it, I saw something different. "I see us," I said softly, "building a life together. Maybe a house in the suburbs, maybe a place by the beach. Who knows? But I see us happy. And that's enough for me." Rachel smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "That's enough for me too." And in that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, no matter what challenges or obstacles came our way, I would be okay. Because I wasn't the same person I had been before. I had grown, I had healed, and I had found someone who saw me for who I truly was, flaws and all. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the future. I wasn't afraid of love, because I knew that I had survived the worst, and I had come out stronger on the other side. And that was enough. Life moved forward, as it always does. Rachel and I continued to build our life together, one day at a time. We traveled, we laughed, we fought sometimes, but we always found our way back to each other. The fear of being hurt again never completely disappeared, but it became quieter, less dominant. It was no longer the thing that defined my relationships. It was just a reminder of how far I had come and how much I had learned. As the years went by, I looked back on my time with Emily with a sense of clarity. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't even feel the anger or bitterness that had once consumed me. Instead, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons I had learned, for the strength I had found within myself, and for the love I had discovered with Rachel. It wasn't the life I had planned. It wasn't the life I had imagined all those years ago when Emily and I were building our future together. But it was a good life. It was my life. And in the end, that's all that really mattered. I had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about holding on to someone at all costs. It was about growth, about trust, about finding someone who would stand by you through the highs and the lows. And I had found that with Rachel. I had survived betrayal. I had survived heartbreak. I had survived the loss of the life I thought I wanted. And now, I was living a life I never could have imagined. A life filled with love, hope, and a future that was finally mine to create. The past no longer haunted me. It was simply a chapter in my story, one that had led me to where I was now. And where I was now was exactly where I was meant to be. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.